It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the movies of January 15th, 1993. We got more than one movie to look at this time around, actually four movies to look at per se. So let's not waste any more time, let's just jump right on into it, and we're going to start off with the first movie that we have here, the biggest new release of the weekend, and that is the mountain survival thriller, Alive. So as you can see, the movie centers around this incident that happened in 1972, where you had this Uruguayan rugby team crash their airplane into the Andes Mountains, and they have to figure out how to survive. And a lot of these people don't survive in this movie, and but the few that the few that did, some of the survivors actually did work on this movie as a technical. In fact, one of the survivors was a technical advisor on the film, Nandu Parado, who was actually portrayed in this movie by Ethan Hawke. This movie is directed by Frank Marshall. This comes after he did Arachnophobia 3 years ago, written by John Patrick Shanley of Joe vs. the Volcano and Moonstruck fame, and you've got some really good talent here. The story overall is very interesting, very exciting to see. Unfortunately, the movie itself, I just don't think it had that spark that this type of a movie could usually work with. I think let me put it this way. I think a better movie, like something like this, is something like Everest that came out about 10 years ago, which I think that was a much better movie than this movie is, unfortunately. But, it's not a bad movie per se. It's just that the story just seems very formulaic, feels very cliched, and it doesn't really go into this story that seems like an amazing story to tell, but I think it just takes the safe way out of it. And you have a really good cast involved in here. You got John Malkovich doing the narration. As I mentioned, Ethan Hawke is in here. Elena Douglas, Danny Nucci, Josh Hamilton, Vincent Spano, Bruce Ramsey. Just a good cast overall here. They're doing the best that they can here, but the main problem with the movie, I think, is the story, and that's really something that when you have a guy like John Patrick Shanley, who's one of the great writers of this time period, who is writing these really great movies, and then he does something like this, where it just doesn't feel like he's really putting his all into it. It feels like a movie that's just kind of being written as a crowd-pleasing movie, and nothing that really is going to win him another Academy Award. But maybe that's why it was released in January, because maybe Disney even figured it out themselves that this probably wasn't going to work out too well. This was also actually a Paramount co-production, too. One of the few Disney movies that Paramount worked on before they eventually worked together on the Marvel movies, the early movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But yeah, overall, the movie is okay. It could have been a whole lot better, but as it is, it's just an okay movie. It's not one I want to watch over and over again, but I am glad I saw it. I am glad to see that the stuff that I did like about this movie, I did like. I just wish the script was a much better written script, honestly. That's just my major complaint with this movie. Other than that, I think it's just fine for what it is. So that's Alive. Let's go ahead and move on to the next movie, and that is Jean-Claude Van Damme in Nowhere to Run. I don't know. This is pretty much what Jean-Claude Van Damme was doing at the time. Really, was there anything different about this movie than any other Jean-Claude Van Damme movie? I guess it's not just a straight-up action movie. I guess he is trying to be more dramatic, but at the same time, there's really nothing there that makes this different than anything else that Van Damme had done up to this point. And the movie itself it's another one of the, it's kind of like Alive. It's just an okay movie. It's not a bad movie per se, and I do think Jean-Claude Van Damme does show that he can do some dramatic acting in this. Not a whole lot, but at least he's showing it in this. But yeah, I saw it once, thought it was okay, but it's not something I really want to run out and see again. It's one of those movies that kind of feels like it just felt like a movie that didn't really work as well as I think they wanted it to. I think you got a script right here that's by Joe Esterhaus, who had just come off of Basic Instinct. This is the first movie he did after that, and he was one of the co-writers on this. This was supposed to be part of a 3-year picture deal with Columbia Pictures for Jean-Claude Van Damme, and I don't know. Even Van Damme himself has said that the script was not that good, and the writers told him they were going to fix everything, and never did anything with it. So it felt like Van Damme was kind of trapped into doing this movie. I do like that he did try his best to show that he could be just more than an action star, but other than that, though, this is just a pretty generic action movie, honestly, with some quality actors involved. You got Rosanna Arquette in there, Kieran Culkin, just as his brother Macaulay Culkin was in the peak of his career. Ted Levine, Josh Acklin. Good cast overall, but the script is just a mess all around. It's a movie that doesn't really give Van Damme a chance to really show his acting chops in here. Even though he tries his best at times, it's just not enough here to really recommend it. It's a movie that I saw, I was just like, okay, that was not terrible. That's probably the best way I could describe it, but yeah, it's a movie that's instantly forgettable once you see it, so that's Nowhere to Run. So let's go ahead and move on to the next movie that we have here, and that is Madonna and Willem Dafoe in the erotic thriller Body of Evidence. And here we have yet another one of the many rip-offs of Basic Instinct that came after that movie became such a success. I mean, the movie right here pretty much is just a knockoff of Basic Instinct, and not a very good one. You could put Madonna with all these talented people, Willem Dafoe, Joe Mantegna, Anne Archer, a young Julianne Moore, and even then, they can't save this movie. And Madonna's not a bad actress. We've seen her be good in movies. Desperately Seeking Susan. I liked her in Who's That Girl, even though I don't think that movie's all that great. And then she's just done A League of Their Own. I mean, she's proven she's gotten some acting chops here, but they're just really forcing another Basic Instinct on this. It's not even a clever movie. Like, Basic Instinct at least kept the mystery aspect going, where you can watch the mystery and be like, okay, I can see where the potential twists and turns come in here, and I'm not completely convinced on what's going to happen in the end. You can pretty much tell how this is going to end. It's just like, it's not even that great of a movie. Like, I'm sorry, I don't like seeing. I'm sorry. The Green Goblin and Madonna don't make for good sex scenes. That's what I'm trying to say here. But like, yeah, they're not sexy scenes whatsoever. The acting overall is pretty mediocre. The script is just a mess, and it was one of two misfires for Madonna in terms of erotic thrillers in 1993, because she had another one that came out the following November in Dangerous Game, which we'll get to that later on down the road. But yeah, Madonna picked some good movies, but then there's movies like this that was just like, what were you thinking when you said yes to this? I mean, it's a mess of a film. It's a mess of a film all around. It's one of the worst movies of the year, and you can kind of see why just from that trailer. So that's Body of Evidence. Now, with that said, let's get ahead and move on to the next movie, and that is the last movie, I should say, Man Bites Dog. The film follows a crew of filmmakers following a serial killer and recording his horrific crimes for a documentary that they're producing. And then if they don't like it at first, but then they get so involved with it, and they eventually become accomplices in this. And it's pretty amazing that this movie actually exists, and it's actually pretty funny. It's a strange black comedy that's pretty horrific at the same time, but it's a really good movie. Like, if you really go into it knowing that it's going to be extremely violent, knowing it's going to take this insane level that it does, you could really find yourself really enjoying this movie. This comes from Belgium, and it's just a ton of fun all around. I was pleasantly surprised when I saw this movie. I was just like, wow, I enjoyed this a whole lot more than I thought it was going to. I don't know if that makes me I don't know if I should be concerned about that, but as far as the movie itself goes, if you go into it with the right notion that you're going to see something very horrific but also pretty hilarious, you can find a lot to enjoy in this movie, honestly. It's one that I was so glad that I found. It's a little bit of an underrated gem, honestly. And it's one of the few NC-17 movies that actually ends up being pretty good when you really look at some of the movies that were coming out at the time. But yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about Man Bites Dog. It's a weird, bizarre black comedy that actually is violent, nasty, but a ton of fun to watch if you're in the right mood. And so on that note, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time we meet, we'll look at January 22nd. 4 movies again to look at, including another mountain movie that was the top film that weekend, Aspen Extreme. We also have Hexed, Night Moves, and Gun Crazy. So we'll look at all 4 of those movies next time. But until then, thank you very much for watching. And if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page. Check out the previous episode. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. And until then, as always, take care.